It's fun to watch the other actors, and most of the time, you can't go big enough. You either freeze or you can't go big enough. So you had a leg up. You weren't going to violate any of that space.
For decades, Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer shared a friendship that many people admired. They worked together, respected each other's talent, and experienced some unforgettable moments in Hollywood. But now, at 75, Kurt Russell is finally opening up about the man behind the fame.
While I was waiting for my agent to come pick me up, this man came by and he stopped me and said, hey, come here, come with me for a second. So I went in to meet the director of this, whatever it was.
Yeah.
The thing was, I had to make a decision.
From their time on set to the personal struggles Val faced later in life, Kurt is revealing memories, emotions, and truths that fans have rarely heard before. What was Val Kilmer really like when the cameras stopped rolling? Join us in this video as we unveil the details. The answer may surprise you. The truth about Val Kilmer. Kurt Russell's final memories. When news broke that Val Kilmer had passed away from pneumonia at the age of 65, many people remembered the legendary actor for his unforgettable performances. But for Kurt Russell, the loss was deeply personal. It was the loss of a friend, a creative partner, and someone he had shared some of the most memorable moments of his career with. Looking back, Russell didn't avoid the subject that followed Kilmer for much of his life. Val had a reputation for being difficult on movie sets. Some directors and actors openly talked about it over the years, but Russell saw a different side of him. Yes, there have been many things said about Val, Russell admitted, but we had a tremendously trusting relationship. To Russell, Kilmer wasn't simply a talented actor. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and completely committed to making every scene better. Russell said that whenever they discussed a movie, Val's ideas always made sense. Even when they disagreed, he respected the thought process behind Kilmer's opinions. Their strongest bond was formed during the making of Tombstone in 1993, a film that faced serious trouble behind the scenes. The production was thrown into chaos when the original director, Kevin Jarrah, was removed and replaced by George P. Cosmatos. The uncertainty could have easily damaged the movie, but somehow the cast managed to pull together and create what would later become a Western classic. Russell has often been credited with helping save the film, but he has never hesitated to praise Kilmer's contribution. "I thought his performance was one of his best," Russell said. Many fans still consider Kilmer's portrayal of Doc Holliday one of the greatest performances in Western film history. Russell certainly does. He remembered how closely they worked together throughout the production. "We were always in cahoots," he recalled. "We were always thinking the same thing." That shared understanding made the experience special. Instead of competing with each other, they collaborated. They pushed each other creatively and helped shape scenes together. For Russell, it was the kind of partnership every actor hopes to find at least once in a career. Of course, Russell never pretended Kilmer was easy all the time. "I don't disagree that he was complicated," he admitted. But what stood out to him was how openly Val carried his emotions. Whether he was excited, frustrated, passionate, or determined, everyone knew exactly where he stood. Russell appreciated that honesty and eventually developed a soft spot for his friend. Part of what brought them closer was Kilmer's unique sense of humor. It could be sharp, sarcastic, and sometimes even cutting. Not everyone understood it, but Russell loved it. Thinking back on those days still makes him laugh. One of his favorite memories came while promoting Tombstone across Europe. Russell's longtime partner, Goldie Hawn, joined the trip, and the three of them ended up creating memories that lasted a lifetime. Russell, an experienced pilot, often flew the plane himself as they traveled from country to country. "We had a wonderful time in Europe," he remembered. "Goldie and Val and I." The days were packed with interviews, appearances, and travel. By the end of some days, Russell joked that Kilmer had completely worn him out. "There were times I'd tell him, 'Look, take Goldie and go out to dinner. Have a good time. I'll talk to you later. I can't hear another word. I can't listen anymore." The memory still makes Russell laugh. Kilmer had a nickname for him, concrete head. According to Russell, it was because he could be incredibly stubborn and firm in his opinions. Years later, life became much harder for Kilmer. In 2014, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The illness and treatments slowed his acting career and left him struggling to speak after surgery. But even then, Russell says, the qualities that made Val special never disappeared. His humor remained, his intelligence remained, and his ability to make people laugh remained. About 3 years before Kilmer's passing, Russell visited him at home for what would become their final meeting. The visit left a lasting impression. Speaking was difficult for Val by then, but Russell could still see the same man he had known for decades. It was difficult for him to talk, Russell remembered, but he had wonderful things to say. During their conversation, Kilmer reflected on his life and the choices he had made. Then, with a laugh, he said something Russell never forgot. "Sometimes I could have been a little bit nicer to a lot of people." The comment was classic Val Kilmer, honest, self-aware, and delivered with humor. To Russell, it showed that his friend had spent time looking back on his life and thinking about the person he had been. "He was being retrospective," Russell said. "He was a good guy." As Russell reflected on their friendship, he spoke about something bigger than fame or reputation. Everybody has strengths and flaws. Nobody is perfect. Everybody's got their full 360 degrees of their person, he explained. And in the end, that's how he chooses to remember Val Kilmer, not as a headline, a controversy, or a Hollywood reputation, but as a talented friend who made him laugh, challenged him creatively, and left behind memories he will never forget. "So I hope he rests in peace," Russell said. Then he paused before adding one final thought. "If anybody deserves to rest in peace, it would be Val." What shaped their bond, and how did it all begin? Keep watching to find out. The young actor who caught Kurt Russell's attention. Long before they became co-stars and close friends, Kurt Russell got his first glimpse of Val Kilmer when the future star was still trying to find his place in Hollywood. It was 1983, on the set of Silkwood. At the time, Kilmer was just 22 years old and had recently graduated from the prestigious Juilliard School. He hadn't yet become the household name audiences would later know from films like Top Secret, Top Gun, The Doors, and Batman Forever. In fact, most moviegoers had never even heard of him. But Russell noticed something different about the young actor almost immediately. Kilmer was visiting the set while spending time with Cher, who starred in the film. Even then, there was something hard to define about him. He carried himself with confidence, but there was also a seriousness that made him stand out from many other young actors trying to break into the business. Looking back decades later, Russell still remembers that first impression clearly. "I could see then that he was the young guy who was very serious about what he wanted to do," Russell recalled. It wasn't fame that seemed to drive Kilmer. It was the work itself. He approached acting with an intensity that would eventually become one of his defining traits. Sometimes that passion would earn admiration. Other times it would create conflict. But no one could question how deeply he cared about his craft. As the years passed, Kilmer's career exploded. He became one of the most recognizable actors of his generation, known for disappearing completely into his roles. Whether he was playing a rock star, a superhero, or a gunslinger, he threw himself into every performance. Then, less than 10 years after that brief meeting on the Silkwood set, fate brought Russell and Kilmer together again. This time, they weren't simply crossing paths. They were about to make movie history. In 1993, both actors arrived on the set of Tombstone, the Western that would forever connect their names. Russell took on the role of legendary lawman Wyatt Earp, while Kilmer stepped into the boots of John Henry Doc Holliday, the quick-witted gambler and gunfighter whose friendship with Earp became one of the most famous stories of the Old West. The chemistry between the two actors was instant. Kilmer's performance, in particular, left a lasting impact. His version of Doc Holliday was charming, funny, dangerous, and deeply tragic all at the same time. Decades later, many fans and critics still consider it one of the greatest performances ever seen in a Western. For Russell, however, the success of Tombstone wasn't surprising. The dedication, focus, and determination that audiences saw in Doc Holliday were the same qualities he had noticed years earlier in that serious young actor standing on the sidelines of a movie set. Even back then, Val Kilmer seemed destined for something special. What shaped Russell's early path, and who was he really? Stay tuned to find out. Before Val Kilmer, there was Kurt Russell. To understand why Kurt Russell's words about Val Kilmer carry so much weight, it helps to understand who Kurt Russell was long before Tombstone brought them together. Kurt Vogel Russell was born on March 17, 1951, in Springfield, Massachusetts. Unlike many young actors who dream of breaking into Hollywood, Russell grew up in a family where the entertainment business was already his father, Bing Russell, was both a professional baseball player and a working actor. He appeared in numerous television shows and films, including the popular Western series Bonanza. Because of his father, Kurt saw the reality of Hollywood from an early age. He understood that acting was more than fame and red carpets. It was hard work, long hours, and constant competition. When Kurt was 4 years old, the family moved to California, placing him even closer to the center of the entertainment industry. It didn't take long for him to find success. By the age of 12, Russell was already starring in his own television series, The Travels of Jamie McFeeters. He wasn't playing a small supporting role or making brief appearances. He was the lead character. For most children, that kind of opportunity would be life-changing. For Russell, it was only the beginning. Throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, he became one of Disney's most recognizable young stars. The audience loved him. Studio executives loved him. He was the clean-cut, dependable face of family entertainment. On paper, it looked like the perfect career. But Russell often felt trapped by the image Hollywood had created for him. He never disliked acting itself. In fact, he took the craft seriously from a very young age. What frustrated him was the narrow box people placed him in. The industry saw him as the friendly Disney kid and seemed unwilling to imagine him as anything else. While acting continued to pay the bills, another passion was growing in his life: baseball. For a while, professional baseball looked like a realistic future. Then, everything changed. A shoulder injury ended that dream and forced him to rethink his path forward. Instead of seeing it as a setback, Russell used it as an opportunity. He returned to acting determined to reinvent himself and prove he was capable of far more than family-friendly roles. That breakthrough came in 1979. Director John Carpenter cast him as Elvis Presley in a television movie for ABC. At the time, many people questioned the decision. Russell wasn't the obvious choice to play one of the most famous entertainers in history. But once the film aired, those doubts disappeared. Russell didn't imitate Elvis. He became Elvis. He captured the confidence, the charm, the vulnerability, and even the loneliness that existed beneath the superstar image. The performance stunned critics and audiences alike. For his work, Russell earned an Emmy nomination and, perhaps more importantly, gained a new level of respect within Hollywood. John Carpenter immediately recognized that Russell could do much more than people expected. Their partnership would become one of the defining actor-director collaborations of the 1980s. In 1981 came Escape from New York. Russell transformed himself into Snake Plissken, a one-eyed anti-hero, former war hero, and convicted criminal who operated entirely outside the rules. The role couldn't have been more different from his Disney image. The audience loved it. The film became a cult classic, and Snake Plissken became one of Russell's most iconic characters. Years later, Russell would often describe Snake as his favorite role because it finally allowed him to break free from the image that had followed him since childhood. The following year brought another Carpenter project that would eventually become legendary. The Thing arrived in 1982 and featured Russell as helicopter pilot R.J. MacReady. The science fiction horror film was tense, frightening, and far ahead of its time. Surprisingly, it struggled at the box office when it was first released, but over the years, opinions changed. Critics revisited it, fans discovered it, new generations embraced it. Today, The Thing is widely considered one of the greatest horror films ever made. At the center of it all stood Russell, carrying the film with grit, intensity, and one unforgettable performance. Then came 1983, and a film that would unexpectedly connect him to the man he would one day call one of his closest friends. Russell joined the cast of Silkwood, a drama directed by Mike Nichols and starring Meryl Streep. Russell played Streep's live-in boyfriend and earned a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor. But something else happened on that set. One day, Cher arrived with her young boyfriend, a recent Juilliard graduate who had not yet become a star. He was only 22 years old, but there was already something fascinating about him. He seemed focused, driven, different. People looked at him and wondered what he might become. That young man was Val Kilmer. Neither of them could have known it at the time, but that brief meeting would eventually grow into one of the most memorable friendships of Russell's life. How did baseball end, and what changed everything for Russell? Let's find out. The injury that changed Kurt Russell's life forever. Long before he became one of Hollywood's most respected actors, Kurt Russell believed his future might be found on a baseball field rather than a movie set. Acting had always been part of his life, but baseball was something different. It was something he truly loved. The sport wasn't a hobby or a backup plan. For Russell, it was a serious career path, and for a time, it seemed entirely possible that he would follow in his father's footsteps as a professional ball player. During the early 1970s, Russell played as a switch-hitting second baseman in the California Angels farm system. He worked his way through the minor leagues, determined to prove himself through talent and hard work, rather than his family name. In 1971, he played for the Bend Rainbows. The following season, he suited up for the Walla Walla Islanders. Both teams competed in the Northwest League, where Russell continued developing his skills and gaining valuable experience. Baseball demanded discipline, patience, and toughness. Those who played alongside him knew he took the game seriously. He wasn't simply passing time between acting jobs, he wanted to succeed. His progress eventually earned him a promotion. In 1973, Russell moved up to the Double-A level, joining the El Paso Sun Kings in the Texas League. For many players, reaching Double-A is a major milestone. It places them much closer to the major leagues and serves as a proving ground for future stars. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. Early in the season, Russell was involved in a routine baseball play that turned into a life-altering accident. While attempting to complete a double play at second base, an incoming runner crashed into him. The collision severely damaged the rotator cuff in Russell's right shoulder, his throwing arm. For a baseball player, especially an infielder, it was a devastating injury. Suddenly, the dream he had spent years chasing was slipping away. Russell was unable to continue with El Paso after the injury. Although he later appeared as a designated hitter for the Portland Mavericks, an independent team owned by his father, it quickly became clear that his playing career would never be the same. During that period, he also helped promote the Mavericks and stayed close to the game. But deep down, he knew the reality of the situation. His shoulder simply wouldn't allow him to continue pursuing baseball at the level he wanted. The injury forced Russell into a decision he never expected to make so soon. In 1973, his baseball career came to an end. For many people, such a setback might have felt like the closing of a door. For Russell, it eventually became the opening of another. With baseball no longer an option, he turned his attention back to acting. Looking back now, it's remarkable how much depended on that single play at second base. Had the injury never happened, Kurt Russell's life might have taken a completely different path. He may have spent years chasing a place in Major League Baseball instead of becoming one of Hollywood's most recognizable actors. And if that had happened, he may never have crossed paths with Val Kilmer in the way he eventually did. Sometimes the moments that seem like the greatest disappointments end up shaping the future in ways no one could ever predict. What came after baseball ended, and how did love for Kurt Russell begin? Keep watching to find out. The love story that defied Hollywood rules. While Kurt Russell's career continued to grow throughout the 1980s, his personal life was going through major changes as well. In 1979, while filming Elvis, the role that transformed his career, Russell met actress Susan Hubley. The two quickly connected, and that same year they got married. Not long afterward, they welcomed their son, Boston Russell, who was born on February 16, 1980. At the time, it seemed like Russell was building both a successful career and a stable family life. But as often happens in Hollywood, things didn't unfold exactly as planned. The marriage eventually came to an end, and by 1983, Russell and Hubley had divorced. That same year, however, another relationship was beginning, one that would become one of Hollywood's longest-lasting love stories. Russell had known actress Goldie Hawn for years. In fact, they had first appeared together as far back as 1968 in the one and only, genuine, original family band. At the time, both were at very different stages of their lives, and nothing romantic developed between them. Years later, everything changed. While working together again on the film Swing Shift, they reconnected in a way neither had expected. The friendship grew into a romance, and before long, they became one of the entertainment industry's most admired couples. Their bond grew even stronger after the release of Overboard, the 1987 comedy that became one of their most beloved collaborations. Audiences loved their chemistry on screen, but what made people even more curious was the fact that their relationship off-screen seemed just as genuine. In 1986, Russell and Hawn welcomed their son, Wyatt Russell. Years later, Wyatt would follow in his parents' footsteps and build a successful acting career of his own. As the decades passed, Russell and Hawn built a life together that stretched far beyond Hollywood. They owned homes in several locations, including British Columbia, Colorado, New York, and California. Yet, despite spending much of their lives in the public eye, they always seemed more interested in family than celebrity culture. One of the questions they were asked most often was simple: why never get married? For years, fans and reporters wondered why one of Hollywood's most successful couples never felt the need to make it official. In a 2020 interview, Russell finally explained their thinking. According to him, a marriage certificate was never going to create something they didn't already have. Their commitment came from the relationship itself, not from a legal document. For Russell and Hawn, the secret wasn't marriage. It was choice. Every day, they chose to stay together. That philosophy helped them build a relationship that has lasted for decades in an industry where many romances struggle to survive even a few years. Outside of family life, Russell also developed interests that many people don't immediately associate with a Hollywood star. He became an accomplished pilot and earned licenses to fly both single-engine and multi-engine aircraft. Along with instrument ratings, flying wasn't just a hobby, it was a passion. In fact, aviation became such an important part of his life that he later served as an honorary council member of Wings of Hope, a humanitarian aviation organization. In 2003, Russell and Hawn made a major life decision when they moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. The reason wasn't work or business opportunities. They moved so their son Wyatt could pursue his dream of playing hockey. It was a choice that perfectly reflected the values Russell had carried throughout his life. No matter how successful he became, family always came first. Those same values would later shape the friendships he cherished, including the one he shared with Val Kilmer. For Russell, loyalty wasn't something reserved only for family members. It extended to the people he respected, trusted, and cared about throughout his journey. How did Russell's life connect to Kilmer's rising career? Let's find out. The making of Val Kilmer. Talent, tragedy, and an unforgettable career. Before Kurt Russell would come to admire Val Kilmer as a friend and creative partner, Val's story had already been shaped by talent, ambition, and heartbreak. Val Edward Kilmer was born on December 31, 1959, in Los Angeles, California. He was the second of 3 sons born to Gladys and Eugene Kilmer. His father was a successful industrialist and real estate developer, while his mother came from Swedish ancestry. Growing up, Val was surrounded by opportunity, but his childhood was far from perfect. When he was only 8 years old, his parents divorced. Like many children facing family changes, the separation left a lasting impact. Life continued, but things would never feel quite the same. A few years later, his mother remarried, and the family tried to move forward. Yet, an even greater tragedy was still ahead. In 1977, Kilmer's younger brother Wesley suffered a fatal accident and drowned in a hot tub after experiencing an epileptic seizure. He was only 16 years old. The loss devastated the entire family. Friends and family members would later say that Val never completely got over his brother's death. The tragedy stayed with him throughout his life and influenced both his outlook and his art. Many believed the emotional depth audiences saw in his performances came, at least in part, from the pain he carried privately for decades. Despite the hardships, Kilmer's talent was impossible to ignore. He attended Chatsworth High School, where he shared classrooms with future stars, including Kevin Spacey and Mare Winningham. Even as a teenager, people recognized that Kilmer possessed something unique. He wasn't interested in being ordinary. He wanted to be great. That determination paid off when he earned a place at the prestigious Juilliard School in New York City. At the time, Kilmer became the youngest student ever accepted into the school's highly respected drama division. For a young actor, it was an extraordinary achievement. Juilliard pushed students to their limits, demanding discipline, focus, and complete dedication. Kilmer thrived in that environment. He immersed himself in the craft and developed the skills that would later make him one of the most versatile performers of his generation. His career began with comedy. Audiences first saw him in films such as Top Secret and Real Genius. Both movies showcased his charm, timing, and natural screen presence. But Kilmer wasn't content being known only as a comedic actor. He wanted more challenging roles, and he got them. Everything changed in 1986 when he stepped into the role of Tom "Iceman" Kazansky in Top Gun. The film became a global phenomenon and introduced Kilmer to millions of moviegoers around the world. Suddenly, he was a star. But unlike many actors who find success in one role and stay there, Kilmer constantly searched for new challenges. He became the fearless swordsman Mad Martigan in Willow. He transformed himself into rock legend Jim Morrison in The Doors. He delivered a career-defining performance as Doc Holliday in Tombstone. Then came Batman Forever, where he took on one of the most recognizable characters in popular culture. In the same year, he also appeared alongside Robert De Niro and Al Pacino in Heat, proving once again that he could move effortlessly between blockbuster entertainment and serious drama. What made Kilmer special wasn't simply his talent, it was his commitment. When he played a role, he threw himself into it completely. Sometimes that intensity created friction. Sometimes it earned admiration. Often, it did both at the same time. But nobody could accuse him of doing things halfway. Beyond film, Kilmer also loved the stage. He performed in productions of Shakespeare and other classic works, continually returning to the theater that had helped shape him as a young actor. Years later, he even wrote and performed Citizen Twain, a one-man show based on the life and writings of Mark Twain. It was another example of his willingness to take creative risks and follow his own artistic instincts. Then came the greatest challenge of his life. In 2015, Kilmer was diagnosed with throat cancer. The battle that followed changed everything. Treatments saved his life, but they came at a heavy cost. Medical procedures damaged his vocal cords and left him struggling to speak. He underwent chemotherapy and multiple surgeries, including tracheotomies that permanently altered his voice. For an actor whose instrument had always been his voice, the loss was heartbreaking. Yet even then, Kilmer refused to give up. Instead of hiding from the public, he chose to tell his story. In 2020, he released his memoir, I'm Your Huckleberry, offering an honest look at his career, successes, mistakes, and health struggles. The following year, he released the documentary Val, allowing fans to see his life through his own eyes. The film revealed a man who had endured extraordinary highs and devastating lows, but never lost his sense of humor, creativity, or love for storytelling. His final appearance on screen came in 2022's Top Gun: Maverick, where he returned as Iceman one last time. For many fans, the emotional reunion served as a powerful reminder of everything he had overcome. Then, on April 1st, 2025, Val Kilmer passed away from pneumonia at the age of 65. The world lost a remarkable actor, but for Kurt Russell, the loss was even more personal. He lost the talented young man he had first met decades earlier on the set of Silkwood. He lost his Doc Holliday, and most importantly, he lost a friend. What do you think about Kurt Russell's revelation about his friend Val Kilmer? Let us know in the comments section below. In the end, this wasn't just about Val Kilmer's career. It was about friendship, loyalty, forgiveness, and the memories that remain long after someone is gone. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more fascinating stories behind Hollywood's biggest legends.